I would like to thank the IMEC committee and for the invitation. It's great to be here. And I was asked to be disruptive in my talk in a way, borrowing from the theme of many of the sessions today, and draw on my research on innovation and talk about how firms profit from technological and business model innovation. So we heard many times during the previous talks the phrase business model, changing the business model. So I will try to dig down a little bit on this kind of issue. Just to start with a happy coincidence, about 2 weeks ago, I was visiting the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. And I was mesmerized by the beauty and elegance of the vessel, the river vessel of the Prince of Wales that was rowed by 21 oarsmen at the time. And then we can see we have really been a long way since then. And now we are discussing about the autonomous cargo ship designs and how this might change the way that we know the shipping industry today. So indeed, we have witnessed in our lives many different business models that have emerged, and they have completely transformed the way we do things. So think about Amazon, that has changed the way we buy books, music, movies, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, almost everything. Airbnb, that has changed the way we search and book for accommodation when we travel, as well as the Zip car, that has changed the way they argue that you can avoid the hassle of owning a car and the expenses that go with it. And in that way, you can just rent a car by the hour and go to your destination. So what is a business model then? You can describe a business model. You can say that it describes the way that you create, deliver, and capture value, right? And therefore, a new business model will be changing the ways that you are creating, delivering, and capturing value. Now, how is business model innovation different from the more canonical types of innovation that we are more familiar? Let's say product and process innovation. So they are complementary, and you can argue that they are closely intertwined in the sense that you might need a completely new business model to market a new product that is radically different from the existing products. But equally likely, a new business model can allow you to provide new offerings to your customers or reach out to a new market segment. Therefore, the key question I'm going to address in this brief talk is how firms can devise and implement novel business models and profit from that process. The kind of questions that you might be asking is, does it pay to be a first mover or to be a fast follower? Exactly because business models do not qualify for what we know as formal IP protection, for instance, patents, trademarks, design rights, copyrights, right? So how can you profit from that? These are the kind of questions that I will try to address. And for that purpose, I will draw on on a number of studies that we have carried out together with colleagues. I will emphasize on the pay-as-you-drive auto insurance, but also we have carried out a large survey questionnaire which involves knowledge-intensive business service firms in the UK and the US. So that's the background of the talk. Now, knowledge-intensive business service firms are those that a large percentage of their employees hold university degrees or other professional qualification. And why are they interested? Why are they interested to study innovation and business model innovation in that context? So one interesting element is that innovation often is the result of using technological advances that that come from other sectors of the economy. It might be AI, ICT, and so on and so forth. The other thing is that innovation is the result is often co-produced with a client, right? So it's in the process of collaborating that you come up with a new idea. And this makes very hard to allocate intellectual property rights, just because the innovation has been co-produced. And therefore, the question is, how can firms profit when they come up with innovative processes and products? So let me draw a little bit more on, on a case study, which is the introduction of pay-as-you-drive auto insurance by Progressive initially in the States and then Aviva in the UK. This is a new method. This is a different method, an alternative method of determining the insurance premiums on the basis of where, when, and how a car is driven. So instead of drawing on the driver's demographic characteristics, that normally if you are a young male and a new driver, Ian perhaps could help us with a kind of the way that these demographic characteristics work, you tend to be paying higher premiums, right? So instead of paying the average premium, you pay a premium on the basis of your actual driving behavior. And therefore, this method solves the information asymmetry between the insurance provider and the driver. So the way it works is that you used to attach a black monitoring box to the onboard diagnostics port of the car, and in that way it would transfer all the information to the insurance provider. Now this kind of product, this offering, had widespread implications for the business model, all the building blocks, almost all the building blocks of the business model. It transformed insurance from a fixed cost to a variable cost because you can control consumption, right? You can control how many miles you drive. And it is seen as a more transparent way of paying insurance premiums. It allowed you to access different market segments, low mileage drivers, and better drivers or young drivers that will be paying very high premiums. It also changed a lot the skill set that was required by insurance providers. So they had to develop, they had to come up with new IT hardware and software solutions. They had to collaborate with telematics providers. They had to collaborate with breakdown services to install the black boxes, the monitoring devices to the cars. And therefore, they had a set of different knowledge, resource gaps that they had to fill in through partnerships. But also it changed the profit model. So in the sense that you were getting lower insurance premiums because you were cherry-picking the best drivers, but also you had fewer loss expenses. So it changed completely the model. Now, what I have tried to do is to codify what we can learn from this case, as well as from the large survey questionnaire that we have carried out in terms of lessons that can be learned about profiting from business model innovation and technological innovation. So the first lesson is that although business models cannot be protected with formal means of IP protection, the core know-how can be protected. And indeed, Progressive had a number of patents and trademarks covering the pay-as-you-drive solution. Now, what is interesting is that what we find is that relying on formal means of IP protection is only a short-term kind of solution, in the sense that long-term competitiveness depends on whether you exploit this initial window of opportunity, if you like, to build your complementary assets. These are value chain activities that are required for the successful commercialization of a new product or process. So in particular, if you look at the case of Progressive, they had to find out what kind of behavior, what aspects of driving behavior to operationalize and measure. They had to find which variables will have predictive power to provide to determine the insurance premiums. In terms of operations, they had to come up with the models to exploit this deeper level of data and improve the underwriting efficiency. And in terms of marketing and sales, they experienced this kind of privacy concerns. So drivers were saying, we don't want to have the big brother in the car, right? So they had to deal with these privacy concerns that drivers had, as well as state regulations, because in different states, in some states it was not allowed to monitor driving behavior. The second kind of lesson is that once you introduce a radically new product or a new business model, unavoidably there are resource gaps. And the way to fill in these resource gaps is through partnerships. So if you take Aviva, for instance, when they tried to introduce this offering in the UK, they had to collaborate with IBM for the technology, the monitoring device, the use of the data, the monitoring of the driving behavior, and so on and so forth. So something that is interesting is that on the one hand we said that you need to rely on formal means of IP protection, but at the same time we said that you need to be open and collaborative. So how do we square these two things? In the survey questionnaire, in the results from the survey questionnaire, what we find is that actually it is a modest use of formal means of IP protection that produces the best results, in the sense that we found out that although service firms don't find formal means of IP protection as effective to capture value, however, they are very important in terms of collaborating with others. So in the upward sloping part of the curve, you can argue that you need some framework to determine what should be shared and what should remain private in collaborations. But in the downward sloping part, when you over-rely on restrictions by legal departments because of IP protection issues, then unavoidably you are undermining your capability to collaborate with others. The fourth lesson is about the timing of introducing an innovation. And indeed, drawing on the pay-as-you-drive case, you can argue that in the very beginning, Progressive experienced many obstacles, an adverse climate in trying to implement pay-as-you-drive. So there was a lot of technological uncertainty. They didn't know what kind of variables to measure, what to do with this data, whether they could bundle with different services. In terms of market uncertainty, as I alluded before, there were privacy concerns by drivers. Also, some state regulators were not very happy to allow monitoring driving behavior, and Progressive had to deal with the state regulators. But also, and perhaps most importantly, at the time, the implementation costs were extremely high. Why? Because it was the cost of the monitoring device and the installation and the maintenance of the monitoring device. Now, what we see is that over time, these costs have declined rapidly, because nowadays you can just use your smartphone and an application at almost zero cost for the company, right? So in a way, the timing that you introduce the new product or the new business model is very important, in the sense that conditions might be very different. The fifth lesson is about the competitive dynamics. So what we saw from the pay-as-you-drive case is that there were different types of entrants. So in the US, you had companies that were trying to invent around, such as the American Family Mutual, where they were producing an offering, they were providing an offering where they would monitor driving behavior, especially for teenage drivers, and they would offer, let's say, corrective feedback to the teenage driver and the family, right? So it was a kind of different offering so that they don't infringe the IP rights of Progressive. In the UK, we saw many entrants, smaller firms, startups, that were focusing on particular niche kind of parts of the market, such as young drivers or new drivers that would normally pay very high premiums. And they have been successful just because they benefited from the learning that had taken place through the experience of Progressive and Aviva before them. As a final lesson, I would like to talk about the breadth of change, the breadth of business model innovation. And previously we were discussing that firms are activity systems, right? So you can't see any activity independently because they are interdependent actually. And therefore changing one activity might require changing, might have knock-on effects on other activities. And therefore these complementarities are important. So the broader the change, the higher the potential to improve your performance on the one hand, in the sense that you need to ensure internal consistency among the activities. However, what we find is that if you go too far, you are experiencing escalating coordination costs. So imagine in terms of the implications for firing, hiring, changing the skill set of the organization, changing management system and controls, IT systems, and so on and so forth. So making just independent changes might not improve your performance just because you lose the fit and consistency, but at the same time, if you go too far, then you are experiencing high coordination costs. So I would like to leave you with some thoughts, many of which have been raised in previous talks. The importance, what might be the implications for the traditional model of SIP ownership and operation. So first of all, there can be significant implications in the future in the value chain structure. The role of OEMs might be changing. So the power by the hour that we have seen in the, by Rolls-Royce and jet engines that Max referred to might be transferred or have application to the way that vessels are owned and operated. Also the implications of automation for skills, employment, and something that perhaps hasn't been covered in previous talks is partnerships. So the importance of different partners because of automation. In other industries, we have witnessed digitalization possibly undermining the role of intermediaries. So what might be the implications for ship management companies and broking firms? And finally, as I explained in the case of pay-as-you-drive, we saw the entry of new entrants, either from adjacent industries or from the same industry. So perhaps we can address some of these issues during the panel discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.